All right, so here we are inside of my vCenter environment. This is the first, I call this my Labview Center. So you saw I had the physical lab layout. I have two hosts. That would be this host right here, this host right here. I have the Avi controller here, and I have MG host 1, MG host 2. And then on my second host, I have that lab DCO1. This is my DNS server. And then I also have the vCenter MG VCSAO1. This is the one we care about. This one right here is also a vCenter. This is actually the one we're logged into right here. This is kind of showing you under the hood what things look like in my lab. You don't really have to be concerned with this too much. So this is the last time I'm going to show you this. From here on out, I'm actually going to close out of this vCenter, and we're going to spend our time inside of this one, MG VCSAO1. And now this one, you can see I had that MG host 1 and MG host 2. In this case, I actually have one of them in maintenance mode. I'm not even using it at all. So we're really focused on just one host right here. And again, this is a nested host that we're looking at. So within this environment, we have that Web01A and Web02A VMs. These are actually using, I believe, Slack's Linux. We can double check, but yeah, Slack's Linux. So basically, I have Apache here. So for example, if I do an ls, actually, I already did that. There you go. So I have index.html. And if I were to actually do a cat on that, we would see that we get this page back. It's just the default Apache page, basically. So basically, I have just the default Apache installation on Web01A and Web02A. Now, remember I mentioned the service engine. So Avi deploys these. These are really your load balancers. There's nothing important that you need to log into to do here. All of the magic really happens on the controller. So I'll just being completely transparent with you, I never log into the Avi service engines ever. There's really not much of a reason to. So that said, you will see that they have a management IP, which we actually configure from the Avi load balancer, or from the Avi controller, I should say. This is where we basically give it kind of a pool of management IPs. So that's what these IPs are coming from. That said, let's go over to Avi and let's start taking a look at the actual load balancer functions. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is go over to the dashboard under applications, and we'll see here, I want to point out one thing right off the bat, which Avi is multi-tenant. So if I click this drop down, these are actual different tenants that I've configured in my environment. And we see here we have virtual services. I have a virtual service called vs-web. You can think of these as a VIP. This is basically an IP and a port number that I've configured, and then it's linked with some kind of pool on the back end. Just to illustrate that multi-tenancy concept, if I go switch to the finance tenant, we see here that now we see test VS. So basically there is a definite separation between those two, and there's full RBAC, so we can control what people can see or access between these tenants. That said, I'm going to go flip back to the admin tenant, and that's where we'll be spending our time in this video. So as I mentioned, there's some pools and pool members sitting behind this virtual service. So if you expand this plus, we can actually see a nice kind of graphical depiction of how things are set up. So we have this virtual service, and this is pointed, in this case, it's just an IP address pointed to a pool, and this pool actually has 3 servers in it. It has 24.125, 24.126, and 127. Now in my case, you probably picked it up. I only had 2 web servers. That's why this third one is down, because there is no third web server. I just wanted to illustrate one point, which is we have this health score. So this little dot right here, if we highlight over it, it basically tells us the overall health of the virtual service. So we have the performance, which is basically how long does the server take to respond, or servers in this case, how long do they take to respond? Resource penalty would be, is the CPU taxed, for example, on the backend servers, that sort of thing. Anomaly penalty is basically really complicated, but basically Avi has done some really intelligent kind of looking at traffic and basically seen that things are maybe happening a little bit different than they normally would, and it might ding us on our health score. Security penalty is maybe we have a self-signed certificate, for example, then we would see like a -20, for example, for that if we were doing like SSL. So all of that kind of culminates together to give us a health score to tell us the general health of our virtual service at a very quick glance. The other thing I like is that I've been mentioning how the service engine is the data plane, and that's ultimately your load balancer. Well, I can actually see that it shows me right here, this is the service engine, or SE, that is responsible for this virtual service. So it's currently only living on one of these SEs as it sits now. Now that said, let's go ahead and drill into this virtual service web. So now we're inside of our VIP, or our virtual service in Avi lingo. And what we're presented with is the end-to-end timing screen. So the first thing I want to point out here is this is actually the user experience. So you'll see here as I move my mouse here, it actually changes the values up here. So these will change, and we can ultimately see the client, how long the client round trip time took to get to the load balancer. So are they on a slow WAN link, for example? Are they having issues? Is it taking them 800 milliseconds to hit the load balancer? If so, that's probably why their experience is poor, for example. We can see the response time from the load balancer to the backend server, and then we can also see the total data transfer time that it took to get the data from the server. So this gives us a really nice idea. So we can look at the spikes and we can very quickly decide what's going on if we have performance issues in our environment, for example. So in this case, we can see that, for example, we have this huge spike here, and we can kind of look at the numbers here. We see that the client round trip time is 3 milliseconds. That's pretty reasonable. We see the total was 7.2 milliseconds, which makes sense because all of this is within my lab environment. But we see it's kind of all over the place, and this makes sense because we have a relatively small sample of data, if I'm being honest, in my home lab. But the one thing I wanted to show you here that's really cool is, let's say we had an issue and said, we wanted to dive into it. Maybe users are having issues. For example, let's go ahead and check this. So I'm gonna highlight the virtual service. We see the VIP IP, in this case it's 10.25.25.100, and it's on port 80. So let's go ahead and hit that just to do a quick test. So we'll do 10.25.25.100, and we get the default Apache page, which is exactly what I said. I have the default Apache installation here. But let me show you something. So if I do a /note.html, I have this special page here. Now we see here it says not found on the server. Here's the problem. This page should exist on the server, but I don't really have any details as far as why it's not being found here. So how do I troubleshoot this? Because it does exist on some of my web servers, but clearly this page is not on all of those backend servers. So I want to show you how I would troubleshoot that with Avi. The first thing we could do is go over to the logs tab of this virtual service, and this is basically going to show us all transactions that have come through this load balancer. So we see here we have a bunch of people trying to access note.html. We have different client IPs. We can see that the responses were 404 not founds, but if we scroll down, we would see probably at some point, let's see, I don't see any that are actually found, but I'm sure it exists somewhere. So basically users come to me and say, I can't get to this file, what's going on? Well, in my case, I could actually use this to select an area and specifically look at load balancing. Actually, let's go ahead and expand this. So I'll say past day. Now, basically what I'm looking at is all logs for the past 24 hours. And again, if I kind of look through these, these are all like 404s and stuff. So we'll see if we have any luck though. But the point is, let's go ahead and expand one of these requests. So in this case, we have 2.198 tried to access note.html, which I believe is actually this system right here. So if I do an IP config and we scroll up, let's see. Yep, there we go. So 2.198. So that's my system that I'm on right now. Tried to access that. We got a 404, and we see the total user kind of experience. So we see the latency to the server, from the load balancer to the server, etc. If we expand that request, we see again the end-to-end timing for this specific request. Now, if we look on the left, we have the operating system information. We have all kinds of other metadata, like the device type. We see the browser they're using. If we go to the right, we see kind of some of the load balancing details. So we see the VIP that they hit. In this case, we also see the service engine that serviced this request, because keep in mind, Avi is active. And then we also see on the right side, we can see what load balance pool it hit, and ultimately the end server. In this case, it was 24.125 that serviced this request. Now, if we wanted to see all of the HTTP headers, we can click that, and we can actually see all of them right here. Now, I could actually expand this, and we can see the complete header. So basically, the color codes are showing us differences. So these are the headers the client sent to us. Basically, this is saying we strip the connection, keep alive line here when we sent it to the server, and we added a line here, X forwarded for the client IP. Now, that said, I'm going to close that. But what we do know is we definitely want to solve this kind of 404 issue. And the cool thing is you have this search here, so we can search through all relevant logs. Now, Avi has two different types of logs. They have significant logs and non-significant logs. Non-significant logs are typically HTTP 200s. Basically, things were fine and we got a response. So if I select that, let's go ahead and click that. We see now we also have some of these 200s. In fact, this is what I was looking for a minute ago. So if I were to go to another page, I'm sure I would eventually find some notes note.html with 200s. I'm not seeing any, but I'm not going to spend my time looking for them. But the point is, now we're looking at all logs, not only the non-significant, those HTTP 200 response codes, but also the significant, which are basically the problems. Those are the ones we care about when we're troubleshooting. Now, in our case, we want to specifically look at issues with this page. So if I go ahead and, let's say I go to the response, I say I want to look at all 404s. And in this case, actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead, before I do that, let's go ahead and expand this one. I want to point out one thing, which is anything in blue here, we can filter on. So if we click on any of these, we'll then filter on all of those logs in this time frame. So let's say I want to look at anything relevant to Note.html. I can click that. So now I'm looking at only Note.html, as you can clearly see here. And let's see, there we go. So we do have one right here. This is the 200 I was looking for. So clearly one of our backend web servers has this file. It served it up, HTTP 200, everything was fine. But clearly there's a problem because we're getting all of these 404s. What we can do is highlight that 404 and select equal to, and that will add another, basically a criteria to our search. Now the reason I think this is cool, because now we're looking at only logs where people were trying to access note.html and they got a 404. And here's where the analytics come into play. You see over here it says client analytics. If I click on that browser, I can see that 88% of my logs were from people using Chrome browsers. And again, these are logs specific to this search criteria that we have on the left here. I can see that the client OS having problems. Okay, it's 8 requests from Windows, 1 from iOS, but it is both, so that's probably not the problem. I can go down here, I can look at location. In my case, everything is being generated from within my house, so I'm going to have one location. But if I had maybe San Francisco, London, Tokyo, for example, and I have all these different locations, and maybe all of them are coming from one location that are generating these 404s, that's a hint as well from a troubleshooting standpoint. But here's the one I really care about. If we go down to server IP address, I can actually see what backend server was responsible for these 404 codes. In my case, I can see that 100% of my responses to this 404 were from this server right here, 24.125, which happens in my case to be Web01A. So let's check that out. If we go into that server, I do an ls var www html. We see here it only has index.html. It doesn't have a note.html. Just to drive the point home completely, if I hop onto Web02A and we launch a web console to that one, I'll do an ls var www html. We see that it does have that Note.html. So our troubleshooting is done. We've now confirmed the problem is Web01A does not have that Note.html file, and that's what's causing issues for our users. And again, these issues are not things that we caught in real time. We actually see we had logs here at 9 a.m., which by my count, it's about 3 p.m. my time right now. So these are things that have happened over the last several hours. So there's a lot more to Avi or the NSX Advanced Load Balancer, but I hope this was good as far as giving you a taste of what it brings. I think it's incredibly cool. I'll be honest with you guys, I'm a huge F5 fan, or have been a huge F5 fan. I actually was F5 certified at one point. I love F5, but when I saw Avi, it blew my mind. So hopefully you guys had the same reaction. I think it's really cool stuff. That said, it is Sunday. I'm going to go finish my drink and enjoy some time with my family. I hope everyone's staying safe and healthy. Until next time, take care.